Okay, so we're recording now. I am Jamie Lawson, um, Planning Director for the City of Burlington. And I want to invite you all and welcome you all to the second advisory committee meeting, where we are here to kind of go over the first draft of the Historic District standards updates. We've got the consultants, Phil Walker and Keith Covington on with us, who will be walking us through the district standards updates, and I'll be going over some of our process assessment and some suggestions in terms of the process and amendments to that. Following this meeting, which is being recorded, we are also having a special meeting of the Historic Preservation Commission. And then we also have a public input meeting that is scheduled in conjunction with the Historic Preservation Commission meeting next Tuesday night, May 10th. Letters have gone out to property owners within the local historic districts, inviting folks to attend that meeting as well. So this slide kind of just introduces the different teams and advisory committees and state representatives from the Historic Preservation Commission office who are part of this process. The consultants, our staff, and then you guys have been part of this process and very important part of this process. All right, I guess I'll turn it over to Phil.
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, thanks everybody for joining us and carving out some time in your early evening here. So just the overview, just to remind people what the key goals, if you kind of step back and look, big picture of what we're doing, there are three particular objectives, in addition to just having updated standards, and that is to modernize the standards, things like materials, that may be newer than the last standards when they were produced, things like that. Streamline the process. That's been a really big objective, I think. And looking at things like, right now there are basically three categories of approvals, or well, the third doesn't require approval. There's major that requires HPC approval. There's minor that requires an administrative approval, and then what's considered maintenance work. And the objective is to try to shift, some of the things that are now major over towards minor, and even some of the things that are minor over towards maintenance. With doing it in a way that still makes sure that the districts are protected and all that, but seeing if we can streamline the process somewhat. And then thirdly, to create efficient and user-friendly standards. And something as simple as having a table of contents doesn't seem like a big deal, but I was actually surprised with your current standards, there isn't a table of contents. So you obviously need to be able to navigate, you need to be able to go exactly to the issue that's specific to the user of the standards. So hopefully we've organized it in a way that's fairly easy to navigate. I want to go to the next one. And this kind of gives you an overview of the process. The process is actually more, this is kind of a simplified version of the process from our scope. We're obviously having, we're having more meetings, even if it's just coordinating with staff or whatever, but we've gone through the first part, all of the planning and content development, stakeholder engagement, which included our first trip to Burlington as the consultant team's first trip, that is. Number three is, which we've done, is the document development. Now, obviously, the document's going to continue to evolve as we have different meetings and continue to get more input, but at least we've got the first stab at it. And then, the last step, which is actually a lot of little steps, is the review and approval process. And 4.2, of course, that's the workshop we're going to do next week, along with the Preservation Commission. And then we'll go before the Planning and Zoning Commission. The City Council will have a workshop with them, and then a council hearing, and then finally adopt the standards. Did you want to talk about this one, Jamie?
Yeah, sorry, take myself off mute. We also included on the website and linked to emails to you guys. The staff has been looking at our COA process and kind of prepared a process assessment associated with our current process. So some of the goals, as Bill has mentioned, to help streamline the process to the extent allowed and practical, to identify if there's any legal or statutory or UDO constraints associated with the standards, to really help clearly define the difference between the HPC's role, both through a quasi-judicial aspect and also the legislative process. So I'll be talking about that a little bit more. And then as Phil mentioned too, really looking at the breakdown of the different types of work to help better define or look at ways to make things a little bit more reasonably practical through an administrative approval, looking at emergency protocols and shifting things where it makes sense from major to minor and minor to maintenance. This is included in the current draft, and staff did this flow chart a while back as we were trying to update our procedurals manual. But we find that this is also a useful tool, and it may be tweaked a little bit, but this helps to identify for folks what our current process is now in terms of, starting through an application and then going through, if something was normal maintenance, obviously no COA is required versus a minor category and the steps that need to go on with respect to that. And then the major works, obviously those types of applications go through to the HPC. But I think just trying to help, explain maybe through a flow chart how the process works is one step where we can, eliminate some of the concerns relative to, how long does the process take, or, what's the next step once my application is received. One of the things I think that we need to add to this is the emergency protocols, which we'll be talking about, and having that, possibly fall under the minor works category where staff has the oversight to review that, but it still needs to go through an application. And the other thing that we'll be talking about too is the design review committee. And depending upon, how that process and that group, is incorporated as part of this document, we want to make sure that we're including that. So we've got some ideas with respect to that. And then also included in the process assessment report were a number of recommendations, and some of these may be things that we've already started and will be ongoing, just like the training efforts, through the city's CLG status. We're required to do ongoing training, but really having the legal department come in and help guide, the difference between the advisory and the quasi-judicial roles. There's been a lot of talk about, ex parte communication and potential conflicts of interest. So getting some additional guidance and training from the legal department would be helpful on this. Other considerations, and these are all up for discussion too, and staff doesn't have, everything set in stone. So we're looking for feedback on things that you feel that they may be benefits in terms of having them added, or potentially, conflicts where you don't think something might work, but these are things that we think might be helpful in terms of moving the process along and making it more streamlined and property owner friendly. So one of the things could be also to expand the number of members. We've kind of gone back and forth on this topic, but to expand the number of members to ensure that there's people on the committee with expertise from an architecture perspective and building experience. Activating the design review committee, and there's been some talk about how that can be established. One, we don't necessarily have to talk about that right this minute, but one of the examples that I think Raleigh has is setting up a design review committee where it is based upon folks that are not part of the HPC that are able to give guidance and informal feedback from I wouldn't say from an outsider's perspective, but so it doesn't involve the ex parte communication, and there isn't a perceived conflict with anyone from the HPC, providing guidance or feedback when an application is submitted. Another option would be to have ex HPC members contribute as part of that design review committee, so that you've got folks on the design review committee who have the experience of going, potentially through a COA process or being on the commission and having some background of how applications have been received and feedback in the past. So we do definitely see that there should be some design review committee available to folks to get some feedback. And we just want to make sure, with input from our city attorney and looking at what other cities do, that we're just not, crossing the line there in terms of the quasi-judicial rules and responsibilities. And then I'll just go through some of these other more quickly.
Well, Jamie, can I jump in real quick? Regarding the design review committee, I think, that's referenced in the UDO, the preservation ordinance within the UDO. And I think the way it's worded now, it says you could have, like a couple of members of the HPC and a couple of non-members of the HPC. And I realize you still want to look into it from a legal perspective, is that a legitimate way to do it? But one thing I would definitely try to avoid is a scenario where all of the design review committee members are not members of the HPC, because I can see a scenario where this design review committee may have certain ideas on a application, or an application that's going to be submitted, and give the applicant advice, and then the preservation commission may see it differently. And I think if you don't have some kind of continuity there, I think that could be pretty it could be difficult.
Yeah, definitely a topic that needs further discussion. Absolutely. Making sure that the standards are available and that there's availability to members of the public to get feedback from staff and guidance on processes and their applications. Another recommendation is to provide annual reviews and recommendations, and that should be to the Planning and Zoning Commission, not the PNA, but also City Council on any text amendments. So that would be, kind of similar to how we approach our Unified Development Ordinance, or our zoning ordinance, if you will, where staff regularly, makes recommendations to the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council on aspects that might need to be tweaked or fine-tuned as they get implemented. And so I don't see that as any, that's just, I think, going to be built into this process. Setting special meetings when needing to assist applicants. I think that's the HPC has been on board with that. Just making sure that we're able to get quorums associated with that. And then many of these I've already discussed, shifting majors to minors and minors to maintenance. And these are some examples where we see that those changes could occur. Major to minor would be an example of replacement of windows or doors and removal, addition, replacement of garage doors, if not visible from the street. Tree topping, and a lot of our landscaping, a lot of the landscape changes, we utilize our city arborist as a reference to help guide, what is appropriate or not. So, I think that that's also a good resource that we can, incorporate where staff would be more comfortable shifting something from a major to a minor, provided that we've got this expertise and guidance from other staff. Installation of permanent signs that meet the historic design standards, another example. And then there's a bunch of examples shifting from minor to general maintenance, such as repointing or other masonry repairs, repairing or installing exterior lighting fixtures, provided that they comply with the guidelines, repairing masonry or wood stairs, landings, if compatible with the structure's design. And then another example would be to remove deteriorated accessory buildings that are not original or otherwise historically significant. Right now, any removal of buildings, any building would require going to the HPC regardless of the significance. And then I just added here at the bottom, I think that's the bottom there. Yep. That we want to have a way to help citizens and property owners in the event of an emergency where there's an immediate need for repair. And so categorizing those into an emergency situation where staff can review them and approve them, in less than a day, in a couple hours, where work can get done, is something that we definitely want to incorporate. And there's a whole other series of things included in the draft currently as other recommendations as well. I guess I'll turn it back over to you, Phil.
Okay. So here's the
Phil.
table. Oh yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but Tom has his hand raised.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead,
Hey.
Tom.
Hey, sorry. And I could wait. It was just I was looking at the process assessment and what Jamie just shared. And Lynn and I talked, there were a couple of things, just the prior page, replacement of windows and doors, if not visible from the street. We're thinking that, it's for discussion, but we would think that needs to stay major, possibly. And then tree topping, it might be, let's see, tree topping shifted to minor. That could go to minor on tree topping if the city arborist was involved. That would be key there. And then under the that last bullet, removal of deteriorated accessory buildings. I've seen a lot of original outbuildings that are deteriorated, and sometimes they're restorable and sometimes they're not. But to move it to maintenance doesn't seem wise to me based on the experience. And that it might be good to keep that one as a minor. Those are my thoughts anyway.
No, we want to hear your feedback. So definitely, thank you for those.
I know you're trying to streamline things and help people get quick results and so forth, but these might be ones to keep the way they are.
Maybe just to counter that, I think we would be fully supportive of all the recommendations that you make here in terms of shifting majors to minors and minors to general maintenance.
Are there any other folks that have, just based on this slide and some examples, are there any other folks that want to share some feedback? Faith, that you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, I think I'm generally agreeing with Tom. I don't understand I'm not understanding why replacing a window or completely removing a window would be minor. That seems like a pretty major change to me. Windows are one of the key things that make historic homes, unique, with all the wavy glass and the leaded glass and stuff. So I don't really understand that being minor. The garage doors, that makes sense to me, because garage doors, we have a very strong precedent of modern garage doors being installed in our garages in the historic district. The tree topping, I do agree, should be with the arborist recommendation. I think everything else looks fine to me. I'm just mostly concerned about complete removal of windows and doors without needing to go with a major COA.
And maybe there's a caveat there that is that states that it's no visible design change. So you're replacing it with a visual design match to what's there.
Jamie, I would just say that
I'm sorry, whoever is speaking up.
really needs to be the same profile.
Sue, we can't hear you.
Sue, you're breaking. Sue, if you can hear me, you're breaking up.
It's
So we're not hearing you clearly. And it looks like your video is screened. Maybe turn your video off.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Okay.
Try now.
No, I'm most concerned about windows and doors, and also the repointing, because there are so many ways to go wrong with those items. And it's not just to have the same number of lights. There's profile differences that have dimensional qualities that make a huge difference in a historic facade. So I would like to see those things remain major, or at least the repointing shifted to minor.
Okay, I think I heard.
I think that's a slippery slope.
Okay,
And it needs review.
Sorry, I don't mean to talk over you. I think your connection is not
I hope you can
that
hear me.
clear.
I'm done.
Okay, so what I think you were saying is you prefer to have, you would recommend that the windows and doors replacement removal section also be major, stay with major, and then the repointing could be potentially minor. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Jamie, just Tom, one comment on what everyone has shared. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The garage doors. Having been on the commission as far back as the first few years in the late 80s, early 90s, there were, and probably still are, a lot of original garage doors, hinged on the sides that open this, with lights in the top, just original stuff. A lot of times those are maybe deteriorated, but they're repairable. And, a lot of people would want to take them out and put in a garage door. They can hit the button and come in and out with their car, but it's, it's not you're in the district, that's, when those exist. So I think as in summary, garage doors may need to stay as, under the major, because there's the old ones. If it's a new one, if it's one that's 20 years old, then that makes sense to do a quick approval on that. But you got to look at what it's the devil's in the details with historic district guidelines.
So maybe one way to address that is to distinguish between new and original, or non-original and original. Would that be a way? I mean, and break it out from that windows, doors conversation, but
The same could apply to windows. There are a lot of replacement windows from the 1950s, 60s, and 70s that obviously replacement windows don't last as long as historic windows. It's common knowledge. And I'm working on a house now just outside the district. Its original 1935 windows are in fantastic shape. In the 1960 replacement set, under the eaves where they're protected are rotting. They're going to have to be replaced again. So the same logic that if it's not a historic, not an original door or window, then if you're going to replace it, you could do that quickly. But does that make sense?
Well, I think it should still be, the homeowner should have discretion here. And while we might be replacing things that are original, you have to defer to the homeowner and the functionality that they want and need of the home that they live in. These are not museums. These are our private residences. And so perhaps a window could be repaired, but maybe I've made the decision not to continue to invest in a window that's 100 years old and has more than served its purpose.
Well, I'm coming from the, what's typically done in historic districts throughout the country. And the goal, the rationale was to try to preserve in a historic district, because so much was being lost in the mid 20th century and would continue to be lost, that there's an effort to try to preserve those elements.
And so is the concern, what are you concerned about being lost? The look of the original window, because a design match would satisfy that.
I haven't seen that's a tricky area. There's been seen a lot of proposals for replacement windows, and they don't really, there's nothing they can do that really matches the historic ones. And I don't think this forum is to get into those philosophy discussions. This is to talk about the guidelines, which is a zoning overlay, and the philosophy, the way that guidelines are typically done when they're historic fabric on the exterior of the building. There's an effort to try to preserve those. We're not saying that you can't, that the owner might make a strong argument to do replacement windows where they're not seen from the street, and the commission may approve that. But the question that I brought up was, is it general maintenance? Is it a minor COA, or is it major work? And based on experience, we think window and door replacement should be major work. That doesn't mean you would be prevented from doing it. You might be able to make a case to do that.
So Jamie, can you expound on why staff was already headed down the path of including these in taking them from major to minor?
well, I mean, staff is trying to be mindful in terms of improvements that need to be made to keep the district intact, while encouraging property owners to be able to, upgrade, enhance their home. And so there are, with the caveat that we put in here, if it wasn't visible from the street, we felt that was, could be a balance, where that might be, less visually intrusive than, across the board, just saying these changes would be, shifted from major to minor, without any regard. There might be, some situations where it's on the back of the house, or potentially on the rear and the side, where it's not as visible. So that was, kind of our attempt of trying to balance, the interest of, kind of what we've heard from some folks of, we would like to see some shifting of projects from major to minor. I mean, obviously, staff is just, one part of this process, and the Historic Preservation Commission will, whatever context it will be the body who will make the recommendation to the Planning and Zoning Commission, and then City Council. So, this is just our first draft of this document, where we're looking for, feedback, and, this kind of a discussion is helpful for us to hear from folks who live in the district and who have been both part of COA's applications and, the contractors involved with them on, what their thoughts are. In some cases, there may not be agreement on across the board on a change, and so that the call is just going to have to be made in terms of our draft and ultimately what goes to the Planning and Zoning Commission and Council.
Yeah, can I just add quickly to that? A lot of this stuff really does get down to, consensus. But, the place where we typically start, I mean, just to use Tom's example of historic windows, all of these design standards, really throughout the state and pretty much throughout the country, they're all based on federal preservation standards, and federal, Secretary of the Interior's standards are pretty darn clear about, retaining as much historic fabric as you can. So they would always say, yes, save historic windows. And so it really kind of gets down to what the consensus of stakeholders is as far as how far they're willing to deviate from that federal standard. But, there is a basis for that. It's just a matter of how closely you want to adhere to those principles of the standards.
I can see also, guys, that Sue has put some of her comments in the chat because she's having some audio issues. So just be aware that folks are adding things into the chat. Feel free to do so because those will also get incorporated as part of our recording.
Jamie, thanks for your explanation, and I really appreciate your efforts to try to take as many things from major COAs to minor COAs or general maintenance. And I think a lot of the homeowners in this district would feel the same way.
Well, we focused on this slide. I don't know if anybody else has any other comments on this. Gentlemen, do you kind of want to, it's now about 6:40, so I think we have until 8. Maybe we'll get there, and hopefully we can move quickly through, just kind of going through the changes and how the draft document is put together. Do you want me to pull up the document, or you guys have that?
I think it would work well if you could just do the share screen and go
Sure.
through it that way, or I can either way, whatever you think.
I can get to it, I think, pretty
Okay.
easily.
Sure. And, we were talking about what's the best way to do this before the meeting. And I mean, one approach is you go through the whole document and ask people to hold off on questions and comments until the end. But I think it probably works better to just, as you see things and think about it, go ahead and chime in with a question. If we get too bogged down on any one particular issue, maybe we'd have to kind of move on and try to come back to it later, or even have a separate conversation. But that's kind of what we'll do. We're just going to go through it and, kind of summarize what's on these pages. And then, if you have questions or comments, just chime on in.
I'm going to lower, Tom, lower your hand, unless you have another comment right now. And feel free, you guys, I'll keep track of anybody who has a comment. Just raise your hand or raise your hand on the in Zoom, and we'll just start with that. Do you want me to just flip through some of the pages here, or?
Yeah, I think that's fine. Yeah. And then, table of contents, we already looked at that. So yeah, you can keep going.
Okay. And just to, I guess, to highlight this, the matrix that would outline kind of the major, minor, and categories of work is under the design review process in this section here. And then there's also, very useful information pertaining to the districts and the landmarks and a lot of context pertaining to different building styles. So a lot of information.
Yeah, so this starts off just talking in very general terms about the benefits of historic districts and landmarks, and it's an excerpt from a article that was in the National Trust magazine or one of their publications. And that just keeps going on. It talks a little bit about certified local governments, which you're one, and the many benefits you get from being a CLG.
Yeah, I saw that these were also used in the Fayetteville standards, and I have to say, a lot of them feel a little anecdotal to me. Suggestion that maybe we don't need cars because we live in a historic district. I'm just not sure how relevant some of these points are to Burlington's historic district.
Yeah, I mean, we could, if there's a consensus to take those out, I don't think it would really hurt the document. Because we do get into things like on this page that are more specific to Burlington. The others are very general. And so, yeah, if y'all want to take them out, it's certainly not going to, I don't think it's going to hurt the document at all. It's just your all's preference.
I would feel like we need to go through, I know what's on this page are very relevant and pertinent to our district. We'd have to go through and build a consensus, item by item.
Well, and back to the other one, the general ones, I think you either keep them all in as they are, or you take them out because, this is conveying an article by somebody or some kind of write-up. So we can't just edit it, right? We're quoting the source, the author. So I think you either leave it all in or take it out, or, I mean, we could adapt some of this. I don't want to plagiarize, but you could maybe reword certain pieces of this that we think are worth keeping. Again, I don't think it would be a big loss if we remove that whole little section, but whatever y'all think.
One other suggestion that staff has had on some of the other sections too is, some aspects may be helpful to just have in appendices where the things can be referenced, that it may not necessarily be something that you have to focus on up front, but just, have as a resource as part of.
And I think the reason they're in the front here is just to set the tone, just to, start off saying, hey, this stuff is a good thing. And so it made sense to have that at the beginning. So I'd probably either eliminate that section altogether. I don't think it'd be worth putting in the appendix, but that's my personal opinion. I'm fine either way.
It's just my opinion. I think we should keep this introductory section. It's for people who are new to the historic district. They think it's a good idea. The background information is good for them to understand. It's a quick read. It doesn't take up a lot of paper, digital space, and it helps. There are always new people, and they need to hear about why we have a district, why we have guidelines, and some of this information tells them about that story.
Sue just chimed in that she'd like to keep it as well.
Some of these points are not factually relevant to the districts that we have here.
Mm-hmm.
So can you give us an example so that we can maybe talk through it?
Sure. Point 2, that properties within our local district have appreciated at greater rates than the market overall. And we have GIS data that has shown otherwise. I think that a lot of it reaches a little bit, saying that a local district helps the environment. Again, to suggest that we don't need cars because we live in this is not a walkable city where we can just not have a car and be able to go to the grocery store a few blocks away.
Yeah, I understand. I understand what you're saying, but I mean, like, I would push back a little bit on that, in that these are general, and it doesn't say that you should eliminate cars. It just says that you have the potential for reducing the need for cars. And that is one of the things about your districts that is very similar to a lot of historic districts is, it is walkable. No, you may not walk to work every day unless you worked downtown and you had a way of crossing that very busy street. But you doesn't say that you should eliminate all cars. It's just saying that preserving that neighborhood reduces that need. And so that's the only thing I would say to that. But again, I'm with Phil. If the general consensus of everyone is to, that these are just too generic for Burlington, it's not hard to remove them. So.
Yes, just to get a sense from the group, and I'm seeing some people just put comments in chats. Just generally raise your hand if you feel that this is an important, if you have an opinion and you feel that this is an important part to keep in, just so we all can. I'm seeing two hands, 3 hands, 4 hands. So we may, again, some of these things, we're just going to have to make a judgment call. I think that this is one of those areas that probably can have more topic for discussion, but and then again, just seeing some comments in the chat in response. So maybe we'll move on from this and to the next section. And that's me who has to direct this. So I guess I can control the pace of how quickly we go, right?
That's right. That's right.
Keep reminding me. So I think everybody is in consensus that this is an important part and this is relevant to the city of Burlington and has factual information. So unless you tell me otherwise, I'm gonna keep going. And then we go into the legislative and general statute references for the district, the commission, landmarks, and then the UDO intent for the districts too. So I think this is understood to keep going here. Background in terms of the local historic district and the landmarks and the responsibilities of the HPC and the design review committee. We talked a little bit about how that may shape out.
Tom had a comment about a tax credit project. Is it one that was not on that list, Tom?
What do you mean, Phil, not on that? It was one of those on the list. I was supporting the introduction.
Okay. Oh,
You
good.
know,
And one of the things that we had talked about possibly doing is, because I think, Phil, correct me if I'm wrong, 1 or 2 of those are in the district, that we might even do a little highlight of those just as an added context to a successful use of that tax credit.
Yeah, like in other words, we might do a little sidebar. Like there were 2 houses, they're actually close to each other on Front Street, that were both tax credit projects. They were just like a couple lots apart, I think. And that's one thing that especially if we eliminate something and create more space somewhere, it might make sense to add that.
Mm-hmm.
So then this just kind of summarizes the different types of work, and going from the non-reviewable, which is the general maintenance, normal maintenance category, the minor works for the COAs that are the staff approvals, and then the major works, and then the addition here of the emergency situations, where that's oversight with staff.
And so, Jamie, that's where you are thinking about making like a further reference, because this is talking about more like natural disasters, but you'll expand this to include emergency approvals on necessary maintenance.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
That's good.
Yeah. let's see, any,
Oh, just, can I ask a question? I'm not sure I understand that issue. Emergency situations for regular maintenance? Can you give an example of what that scenario might be?
Sure. If you have a roof that is in need of a very time-sensitive repair, but because of the situation, it would require a major COA approval. And so you're delayed by a month or two in order to get it approved.
like an example could be, and maybe, I don't want to speak for you, Emily, but you know, if a tree fell on your house and you didn't, and so repairing the roof, replacing the roof, if that's what fell under major, staff could make the call that, you know, that's an emergency, health and safety, quality of life issue. We could also consult with the director of inspections and also, you know, code enforcement potentially on helping to make that call on, you know, this is an emergent type of a repair. I guess the same thing could be said for windows. In some cases, you know, if the front of the house or the side of the house, you know, I see it more like, you know, tied to some sort of disaster, really, but it could be.
Yeah, you know, I think, can I?
If somebody drove into your house.
Yeah. Yeah, can I try to add to that? I think basically all we need to do, I think with just an added sentence or two that clarifies that some of these quote emergencies might be related to a fire or a tornado or something like that, but it could be a situation where, let's just say, some structural member of a building suddenly gives way, you know, something like that, has nothing to do with the weather or anything like that. Then you've got an emergency. So I think we just add another sentence or two to where it doesn't have to be tied to some major weather event, but it can be, but at the same time, it's obviously not something routine. It's something where the building inspector looks at it and says, okay, you got a dangerous situation here. We need to, you know, move this along. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like a structural failure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. That's an easy fix, and that makes total sense.
Everybody everyone else, hands up, in agreement with something crafted towards that? Okay. One person, anyone who is like adamantly opposed of trying to address some sort of emergency protocol?
I'm not sure I entirely understand the specific. I mean, I understand not having the emergency situation only being tied to natural disasters. Is that generally what we're saying would be the change to this section?
Well, the change would be if something was an emergency situation, if it was declared to be an emergency situation or a repair that needed to be done because there was an emergency situation that was either tied to natural disaster or some sort of dangerous structural situation, that in lieu of having the project, if it had to go to the HPC under minor, in lieu of doing that, it would be approved by staff. So there wouldn't be a delay, a delay on the ability for the homeowner to make or start a repair, that could be commenced, you know, sooner than later.
Okay, and are we defining an emergency as a structural issue or water intrusion that needs to be addressed?
You know what I think? I think the way to look at it, and we'll make sure the language is this way, is that it all boils down to, does the building inspector think there's a dangerous situation? Like, forget about how it happened. It could be a disaster or it could be something totally unrelated. It could just be where some component of the building gives way, whatever. But I think I mean, we can give examples of what might trigger that. But I think the bottom line, kind of the litmus test, is if a building inspector comes out, looks at a situation, says, hey, that's not safe, we need to move this along as far as the approval process, then it would qualify for that emergency treatment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, and I see Sue's comment. Yes, obviously, they would still be obligated to follow the standards and the guidelines in terms of what that repair needs to be. That's understood. You wouldn't be exempt then from continuing with the guidelines and the standards. And the inspection, yes, that's a component, obviously. Yeah, I mean, Tom, I agree that there are other ways to address things that are emergencies, putting up tarps, or patching windows. I think, there's more discussion. To me, this is more of a substantial degradation of a building, and I don't know how we qualify that as an emergency. If there's one or two windows, I don't know if that's going to be an emergency situation. We're going to have to tread this very lightly. If your entire roof blows off, is that something that you want to get repaired quickly, versus just putting a tarp on until the next month? So I don't know if we can, with the consultant's guidance, kind of characterize that even further. This is
Yeah,
definitely something that's, we want. Go ahead.
Keith.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go
You're
ahead,
fine.
Jamie.
No, you're
Okay.
fine.
I always going to say in response to Tom's comment, and I cannot recall off the top of my head if you have a property maintenance code that addresses this, but if there is sort of a temporary fix, a lot of that, when something happens, a lot of that's covered under communities' property maintenance codes, and there's usually a time frame associated with that. So, I think we've got kind of two different situations, going here. You've got one where it's an emergency situation for a number, could be a number of sources, reasons for that. And so you're accelerating the approval process, but whatever the replacement material is, or whatever component has to meet the standards. It just goes through a quicker process and doesn't necessarily go to the HPC for full approval. On the temporary thing, if we add anything in there that tries to, provide a temporary option for people to put up something temporarily to go through the process, you need to make sure that there's a time frame set for that, because in one community I've worked with, and it doesn't even have anything to do with the historic district, but they had this in their property maintenance code, and they had no time frame, and they constantly had issues with something being boarded up and it just staying like that for a long period of time. So just wanted to clarify and add some context to that.
Okay, so I think we'll need to look at this section a little bit more as we go forward. Moving along. So we've go ahead.
I was just going to say, Phil, do you want to kind of sort of talk through this a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, basically, what I did, I looked at, you've already got, a lot of these ideas, a lot of the languages from your current standards, but it wasn't organized in a real user-friendly way. So the first thing I did was I took out all the stuff that was just relevant to a public right-of-way, and we put that on this one table. And then the next few pages are public property or private property, but not necessarily the right-of-way. And so it was really a matter of just kind of organizing it and then going through each one and thinking, and there was some where they might have combined two different issues in one sentence in the current standards, and I would split it up into two different issues, really. So, and then there were things we identified that really weren't addressed. So, it's starting with what you had, but it's evolved quite a bit. And then, once you set up the matrix, it's just a matter of where do you put the green blocks? What's major, what's minor, and what's no COA. And we already kind of discussed that in general terms with some of the things in Jamie's earlier slides. So anyway, if the goal was to shift, see if there's some major things we could shift to minor, see if there's some minor things to COA. But the one thing, and as I was explaining just to staff the other day, when it comes to the term streamlining, I mean, I know it resonates positively with a lot of people, but oftentimes when you sit down and really look at individual things, you're like, I'm not so sure that it's a good idea to shift this one thing from major to minor, because maybe there's too much gray area that you don't want to put that burden of the decision on one person's shoulders. That's why you have a design review body. So, in other words, we tried to move things, towards the right in these columns to the extent that we could, but there were really only so many that we felt comfortable doing that with.
There's a couple of comments or questions in the chat. I think go to the next page, Jamie. Yes, actually one more, and we can go back if we have to. But there is on A23, the question, I think this is Tom's question. Actually, both of these are Tom's. We need to define what a small amount is on A23. And under A27, the question is what does new material mean? And let me see here. Interior with new materials that are identical to the original details. Okay, so I'll take a stab at that one.
By the way, just real quick, and you might have noticed this, Keith, but you notice there's an asterisk on A23?
Yes.
And you see what it says at the bottom. I mean, it may not apply for everything, but it says for siding, roofing, and porch flooring, approximately 20 square feet or less will be considered normal maintenance, not requiring a COA. So that may help a little bit, maybe not completely though.
Oh yeah, that's great. Thanks for pointing that out. I saw the asterisk, but I didn't go down and look at the footnote. So, does that?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then on the new material, I think what would happen there is, I mean, we could maybe use a different nomenclature there. I don't know if this is from the original text or not, Phil, but I think regardless of whether it's new or not, it would have to meet the standards. And so that would mean, for any of those, it wouldn't necessarily mean a material that is new that doesn't meet the design standards.
Yeah, it's just saying replacement material, really. It doesn't state new as if like some sort of, synthetic or something. It's just like non-original. You're replacing it with something that's not the original, regardless of what the actual material type is, and it would still have to follow the standards. So.
Emily has her hand up, I think.
Yeah, I just wanted to tell you guys, I think these charts are great and a good addition to the standards. And once we can negotiate, what's deemed major, minor, or no COA, I think they're going to be so helpful for homeowners. A few comments about landscaping. I was surprised to see, and this might have come from the existing design standards, but that there are different standards for West Burlington versus Glencoe in terms of the tree diameter, and was wondering why we wouldn't harmonize those and apply the Glencoe standard to both districts.
Yeah, and I'll just to answer, that did come from your current standards. And what's interesting, I think in West Davis Fountain Place, it's like 4 inches. And then it's like 15 in Glencoe. And what's interesting is that in the CC&Rs or CCRs in Glencoe, it's actually 12 inches. So it was a little more stringent. In fact, the CCRs are more stringent in a whole lot of ways than the standards we've been doing. We look to see, hey, are we missing anything? everything was more stringent, which is fine. That's a private, legal instrument, and they can do that. So anyway, but yeah, that's to answer your question. It's from the existing standards.
What is the CCR?
The covenants,
Covenants.
something restrictions. What is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I forgot.
I'm drawing a blank.
It's kind of like having,
Runs with the property.
Yeah,
It's
it's like conservation easements or something in a way.
Well, it's more like a lot of times subdivisions, master plan communities have covenants and restrictions that run with the property. So, saying what you can and cannot do, it's not a governmental regulation. It is something that runs with the deed of the property. And Glencoe Mill Village, since it was a master plan community, has those CCRs.
And Faith just reminded us all, it's
conditions,
covenants, conditions, and
restrictions.
Yeah. Thank you, Faith.
But Emily, I want to go back to one thing on the tree things. That is something that we talked about with staff the other day. Not that particular issue. That obviously we need to look at that. But in general, I think we're going to take a look at that in a little bit more detail. The idea of tree diameter and things like that. I don't know that it's going to change, but it is something that we talked about discussing in greater detail.
That's great. And I would encourage you to look into that more and move a lot of these landscaping items to general maintenance at the discretion of the homeowner. I think really trees are probably the only landscaping feature that could be original to the property or predate the property itself. So, I think the homeowner should really have discretion on other plantings that they might want to add or remove. The wording about what would constitute major versus minor changes is somewhat vague. And our property is unique in that it is bordered on 3 sides by streets. So you can pretty much see our entire yard from the street. So we would really advocate for our landscaping choices to be left up to us. Protecting old growth native species trees.
I'll just, chime in for whatever it's worth. One of the things that we have, attempted to do as part of this update and will continue to do as it gets further refined is, to really help to encourage that homeowners have the ability to make the improvements, that they don't feel intimidated by a process, that the standards are, easy to read, easy to understand, but we're also helping to, shift in some ways from minor to major. This was the direction, or major to minor, the direction by council as we started this process. So, that's kind of just some context that I wanted to provide to the group. But, hearing your thoughts and feedback, obviously, and continuing with the HPC, and as we'll have other public meetings as well. But that's, that was one, definitely major part of the process, looking at the process and how to help navigate through that, and also looking at shifting some of our existing categories.
Yeah. By the way, I saw one comment that was asking on that A23 where we got the asterisk. It's like, well, why don't you just take that language that's, asterisk, the little footnote thing, and move it right into A23. Well, what happened is when I did the spreadsheet in Excel, we had everything limited to a single line of text, and I couldn't get all that stuff in there in one line. So that's why I use it. And I guess I don't know, was it, I'm trying to remember, was it you guys, Jamie, or Keith, was it you that massaged it and turned some of the one row lines into 2 rows?
I just turned on text wrap, so it allows it automatically.
Okay, so it just
makes the
automatically
cell
bumped
bigger.
those. Yeah, well, that's why, because when I
so-
look at it now, I kind of agree. But when I did it originally, I had this
gotcha.
goal of keeping everything consistent in one line.
Okay.
So anyway,
Yeah, we could change
Anyway.
that. Hopefully,
My goodness.
I'm trying to save all the chat comments, so I'm hoping that we can use that to go through that. But that shouldn't be a problem if we decide to do that.
Yeah, and I think the chat comments will get saved anyway
Okay,
through when we
okay.
record. So,
Gotcha.
and I also put, I know Nolan wanted to add something, but I also put comments in the chat that I received, and I can share with to you all from Mr. Gant on some of the concerns that he had as he was reading. He got through, I guess, about 70 pages, so not the entire thing, but
Okay.
Yeah, so Nolan here. I just wanted to reinforce very quickly what Jamie was communicating, because from a staff perspective, we're trying to make sure we follow the direction we're given by council, and it was clear that, finding ways to make processes more efficient was a large or a large priority for them in this whole process. And so I just think we got to look for ways to do that as we go through these. Right now, I don't really think we have that many that we've included. It's good to see that we have some, and I think as conversations continue as a group, we need to be looking for ways to do that if we want, the end product to be perceived as successful to a good degree from council's perspective as it relates to processes. So I just wanted to share that.
Oh, and one thing just to clarify on item number 2 from Mr. Gant about, it says tax credit is only available to commercial. That's not exactly accurate. It's only available to income producing properties. So in other words, it could be residential rental and it's producing income, and you can get tax credits for that kind of property. Like the 2 on Front Street, for example, that are residential buildings. So.
See, Tom, you're on mute.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Phil, is this about federal tax credits or tax credits across the board?
So at the beginning, we talked about both in the section on benefits specific to Burlington. I think we talked about both the federal investment tax credit and the state one. And I honestly can't remember North Carolina if y'all have it for non-income residential.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. There is a residential non-income producing tax credit, historic preservation tax credit in North Carolina. It existed for 10 or 15 years. It sunsetted. The legislature re-upped it. So there's a current tax credit available for non-income producing properties.
Okay, good.
Ryan, I see you have your hand raised. Is there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, just quickly to echo Emily's point about landscaping. As I read through this, it almost seems like if you plant or take out a bush, it's at least a minor work. I don't know if that's a wording issue or if that's intended. But I guess the comment is to review the wording in here regarding to landscaping. And I'd echo to defer to the homeowner on that. That seems awfully bureaucratic if there's on that point.
Yeah, and I would also say we really need to avoid using phrases like major or minor in a description of the work, because that leads to a lot of question about what that type of work is. For example, B3, major landscape changes visible from the street. That could mean something different to anyone. So same thing, I guess, with B1, minor landscape pruning. And I don't know what other words we want to use, but I'll leave that up to you guys. But that's just, substantial, insubstantial, minor always comes up. Those kinds of phrasing, just we've had problems with under our existing standards. So we don't want to continue that.
I mean, one of the tricky things I think is if we don't, and I agree, it'd be great to come up with different language, but this is what you kind of get into when you're trying to make things that that might otherwise go before the full commission. And you're trying to figure out now, how can we avoid that? So it could be just a COA from staff. And so then you end up with language like that, that's hard to define. So
I can also reach out to our city arborist and see if he has some suggestions on phrasing. I can't make any guarantees that it'll be different, but I can definitely reach out to him and see what his input is on that.
right. I mean, one of the things when you look at other communities and what they allow administrative approvals on, they're typically things that are, and I hate to sound like a broken record because I know I've said this a lot, but they're things that are pretty much black and white, like signage. If you've got good, clear signage standards, then that's something that doesn't take a judgment call, whatever, and they're administratively approved. When you get beyond some of those kinds of things, it just gets trickier.
Okay.
I do think, yeah, let me just say this, Jamie. I do think it's important to recognize that, and I think everybody here understands this, that with statutes, anything that's considered minor that is being looked at by staff cannot deny anything in terms of the COA. So if the staff was dealing with something that they did not feel comfortable with or felt like was, complex enough in nature that it they weren't comfortable approving, they would be required to take that to the Preservation Commission. So that's something, I just think it's an important piece to recognize in the required process by statutes.
All right, I'm going to move on. And I'm not sure if everyone's had a chance to look at the matrix, but if you have any comments that you want to bring up on additional landscaping or other site features, I can leave it on.
You had mentioned earlier that you were going to make sure that lighting fixtures, yeah, so that's no COA required. Exterior lighting fixtures.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's the repairs to lighting fixtures if replacement materials match the original. That's I think C8. Yeah.
And so what about like replacing a lighting fixture with something that I would prefer?
It's under C10, I believe, repairing, replacing, installing exterior lighting fixtures that comply with the guidelines and are appropriate to the structure. That's also no COA.
Okay, great.
I'm looking for comments or anything in the chat. I'm not seeing anything. What about yes, I agree, Sue. Putting too much burden on staff puts us in the hot seat too. Feel free to always suggest that there could be a dedicated historic preservation staff person. What about fencing? Right now, the fences in a front yard on any site or the side yard fences on a corner lot, those are all considered major COAs. And then I think the rears are minor works. How important to you guys is it that the fences in the front yards or even the side yards, in some cases on a corner lot, would be considered major work? We get a lot of applications for that for replacements of fences. So I'm just curious on your thoughts for that.
Tom Phillip may have a different opinion on this, but I feel like as long as the standards were clear as to the specific type of fencing that was allowed, the height that was allowed, and which location, and where the fence could be placed in relationship to the building. I don't personally see that as being needed to be a major COA unless it didn't comply with the very clear standards that were written.
If I recall correctly, the fence section, it's very different from Glencoe versus West Davis Fountain Place because, and this may get back to, it's because of the CCRs. They specify like a 3-foot maximum. It's got to be a picket fence. Can't be opaque. There's got to be some spacing between the pickets. And I think that's basically, well, let me think about that. No, in Glencoe, maybe you can't have anything in the front yard. Tom, do you remember on that?
Can you hear me? I'm having some trouble trying to log back in.
Yes, we
Okay, I
can
can
hear
hear
you
you.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I think Glencoe, historically, there's good evidence there were no fences in the front. So you can have a fence. It can be, I think, up to 4 feet high, and it can only come to the back of the front portion of the house. So like you've got the front block of the house, and so the fence can come to that corner of that front block. So you can pretty much fence in your backyard, and many have, but they are prohibited in the front. Based
Right.
on work.
Okay. Thanks.
So I guess what I'm hearing is as long as the standards might be clearer, may be clearer, will be clearer, then there's a possibility of shifting things for the front yards and the side yards from major to potentially minor. Obviously, it wouldn't be a no COA. So I guess, guys, add that to your potential list. Any other things on this page that anyone would like to discuss? I'm not seeing anything else in the chat. Okay, I'm going to move on then. So stair replacement where there's a change in design, applying stucco, painting masonry that was not previously painted. We've had those all come in front of the HPC. And then new site features are considered major works here. All right, and then I'm just going to keep flipping. We're about a half an hour or so left.
I like your chart, your flow chart, Jamie. I think that's good to include.
Okay, well, I got consensus. Is this too busy for people to read, or do we need to, is it clear?
It can be a complex thing. So I think as long as people do look at it and answer the questions, it's easy to navigate.
That's good feedback. It's, it's sometimes they can be overkill, these types of flow charts. So anyway, like I said before, there's a couple things we want to add to them as well, but thanks for that. I think
by the way, I mentioned this before, but one thing that we could consider doing is just having 2 separate flow charts, one for major, one for minor, and it might be less overwhelming.
Right.
Intimidating if people just, you go to one or the other and it could stand on its own. You could change the box alignment and all that so that it's still horizontally oriented to fit the page okay. But I mean, that's just one thing you could do.
Yeah. And then, history of Burlington and different transitions of things. And I know you guys want to add more photos. If anyone has photos from the districts or Burlington in general, 2 different districts, or any historic photos that you want to share, feel free to email them to us or get them somehow to us, and we'll be able to scan them here. Background on the districts and the establishments and the maps. again, happy to get any of your text changes. If there's any edits that you want as part of this stuff, feel free to let us know. We'll incorporate that as well. The landmarks. And then we go into the different diagrams for the different
And-
building types.
And Jamie, let me chime in here for a second. Go back a couple to right before this. So one of the things that we did was we kind of added a very short introductory to this. I mean, this is just to make sure that we're all trying to kind of speak the same language, so to speak, when you're talking about the different types of buildings and the different components of those buildings. Because obviously, you know, a house is very different from a Main Street building. The only thing I would add is that we included an industrial type here. And while historically industrial buildings do have a lot of common features, you know, it's kind of hard to capture that in one diagram. So if anyone, you know, has, you know, whether now or, you know, in short order, has any thoughts or questions about that, about those diagrams, let us know.
Guys, while we're kind of on this topic, I guess maybe give some context. We've had with you, staff has had some discussion about, you know, the different building types and references to commercial versus industrial. And, you know, while the districts themselves may be, you know, we don't have local historic districts in the downtown, and our landmark sites may be older industrial buildings, but they're going to convert to potentially other things. So I guess just give some context in terms of your thoughts on the comprehensive nature, I guess, of the different styles that you saw, and, you know, why that's important to keep in context. Either one, chime in, sure.
Oh, do you want to take this one, Phil, or do you want?
Well, I mean, yeah, I guess I will. I'll take a stab at it. But I don't want to. I think Jamie was very careful in not trying to, you know, bend somebody in one direction or the other, and I'm going to bend you just one way. So, you know, I think what a lot of people were expecting when they saw these would that it would be focused mainly on residential, right? And we don't want to confuse people and make them think, oh, you know, they're addressing these commercial buildings, you know, what to do with a historic commercial building or commercial infill, yet we've got almost exclusively residential buildings. But there's two reasons why we think it's really important to give the same level of attention to commercial buildings as well, commercial mixed use. And that's because, first of all, you never know what new historic districts you're going to get in the future. And then you don't want to have obsolete guidelines, so you have to change them. But perhaps more importantly than that, you've actually got commercial uses and commercial zones in both of your current historic districts. I mean, not a whole lot, but it's there. So it's like, if you've got any of it at all, I think you have to treat it just as comprehensively and thoroughly as you would, you know, the majority use or building type, which is residential.
That's helpful in terms of the context, and also just making it clear that this document is not making any recommendations in terms of expansion or altering the districts. So, you know, if that comes up in terms of questions relative to, you know, you folks, that's not part of this at all.
And it's also really clear at the beginning when we talk about the districts. I mean, there's this too, and there's two maps, you know, and so I think people will get that when they read it, that, okay, these are the two districts and landmarks, but there's only 5 of those. But yeah, I just want to explain that why there's so much emphasis still on commercial, even though your 2 current districts are primarily residential.
And also, we have discussed, at least with regards to this section right here, we have, tossed around the idea of including it in in an appendix, the styles and architectural section. I think, well, I don't want to speak for Phil. I mean, I still think it has relevance where it's at, but if, the public and the community feels like, that is something that should be more of a reference in another location, we could move that to an appendix. And I think we even put a note to that effect that we were, that was still under consideration. So I don't know if anyone has any, thoughts, opinions one way or another on that.
Just to add, Keith, to what you said, at one point early on, there was discussion of only moving, say, the commercial and industrial and institutional, building types and styles section to the appendix, and which I think would be a big mistake. I think that makes it even more confusing and convoluted. I think you want it all either at the front where it is now or towards the front, or all in an appendix, but I definitely would not split it up where you've got, talk about building types and styles for residential in the front, and you put the rest in the appendix. I think that would be a mistake, but so it's kind of all or nothing, either in the front or in the back, but we can do
who
either
made
way.
that suggestion? That person was silly.
I totally get where you were coming from.
It was also, I had gotten through, I don't know how many pages. So I'm like, some of this has to be moved. All right. So then we've gotten through that section, and now it's just talking generally about the Secretary of Interior standards and the applicability and the basis really for creating standards in general, referencing that. And so, there's discussion here about the visibility of facades and then contributing versus non-contributing. And what does that mean? Stop me at any point if anybody has, I'm trying to get through this so everyone can see. But these are broken into different categories of types of work.
Building components.
Building components. Thank you. Dealing with, the design. Excuse me, the design standards. So for those who are on like the HPC, we have our findings of facts, and this is kind of the where we would be relating the projects to. These are under the design standards. These are the findings of facts that you would reference when somebody is doing a new project. That relationship to how that project is addressing or not the standards that are in place. Any Christina or others, any questions related to that? Okay.
Hey, Jamie, this is Tom. Something, can you see if there's a place to let me back in the meeting? I'm not seeing the screen.
Well, we're seeing you.
Yeah, we can see you
Yeah.
clearly.
Yeah, and we can hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we can hear you.
And now what?
Yeah.
I've let you in the meeting. You're here.
Yeah.
you wanna-
Do
do you
see,
wanna- Do you want
It's
to?
like the visual disconnected and now I can't find it. Don't worry, I can listen.
Let's see, I can, if you want to stop your video or if you want to try to rejoin, I'll put you in the waiting room and then readmit you. How about that?
Okay.
Okay. See if this works.
Phil, I don't know if it would be helpful to just talk, really briefly about how this is organized.
Sure.
With maintenance and then the design
yeah.
standards and then those steps.
Yeah. So, for each of these components, we started with walls, kind of the most fundamental thing, or one of them. And we started off with maintenance. So in other words, these are things that aren't required to follow a standard because they don't require a COA. It's just general maintenance. And if you notice, they always have a bullet point. And then when you get into actual design standards, we always organize them by A, preservation, B, repair, and then if you go to the next page, C, replacement, which is, the last choice that you'd want to make is replacing something, which is one reason we talked early on in this document or earlier on, we give the example of rotting wood and the fact that you can actually use epoxies and things to still retain, a sash. And again, that falls back to the federal standards to always try to preserve whatever you can, even if it requires repairing it versus replacement. Replacement's always the last option. So they're all organized that way. And since they also, if you notice, there's a B, and a C, at least if the commission's making a decision and they wanted to call out a specific standard, they could note the page number, item C3, like this does or does not meet that. So we try to kind of work it that way as well. So it's not just a bunch of kind of, I've seen a lot of guidelines or standards that are kind of just a lot of running text. The only time you find much narrative here is when we introduce like maybe a new section, a new building component, and it's more almost kind of philosophical or historic based before we get into the actual standards. Is that kind of what you're thinking, Keith?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. You do a good job of explaining it, so I thought it might be helpful.
And so discuss, we're under kind of roof repairs and replacement. And so there's discussion, in kind of each of these categories regarding substitute materials. So can we talk a little bit about like where those materials and examples may be found? So
Okay, yeah. Let me talk about this. So we can always come back to it, but go on to the materials section, I think is where it is. And in some instances, alternative materials are listed in there, but
and by the way, you'll notice a lot of the sidebars specifically talk to Glencoe, just because Glencoe's its own animal. I mean, it really is very different. There's so much cohesiveness in the design, the materials, the way the roofs are done, all this stuff. So it's you oftentimes find, oh, we need a little sidebar because this is specifically
right.
How it's done in Glencoe.
So exactly. And so the materials section kind of starts off by material and talks about, basically maintaining or preserving, cleaning, and so forth, existing materials. But at the end of this section, we have added something that is in its first draft form, and we're really looking for, it's actually under the artificial materials section. All right, go back one for a second. So, there's been a lot of talk of materials, the use of modern materials, that there are a lot of newer materials out there that are getting better and better at replicating historic character. And, a lot of times in historic districts standards or guidelines, what the guidelines do is they provide criteria for the Historic Preservation Commission to make a call on a new material, a material that's that's not listed there, and that's important. And if you go to the next page, Jamie, you'll see that. So you cannot possibly think of every material that is out there. There are just too many of them. So you there
may be new materials too introduced.
And exactly, yeah, new materials are coming out all the time. So you need to continue to have this sidebar in here that kind of helps those that are making decisions to decide on that. But one of the things that we have done here, and I haven't really seen it in other places, I've seen bits and pieces, is to actually include a building materials matrix. Now notice I said building materials, not necessarily retaining walls or other things like that. And so this is the first draft of a building materials matrix that basically goes by component and by the various elements of the component, whether it's primary materials or accent materials or secondary materials, and then, trim and decorative details, and tries to, and this was pulled from several different sources, not just one, looking at other, what other historic preservation commissions do, looking at some best practice stuff, but actually trying to list different materials and whether they would be permitted by right, whether they may be permitted, through HPC approval, or whether they would be prohibited altogether, because they just simply don't have, they don't stand up to the test of really, being a historic, something that would be compatible with historic buildings. So this is not just the new materials. This is a lot of, this is kind of trying to think through every potential material for these different components. And like I said, this is a first draft, and we've already identified some edits. But, particularly for those of you, Tom, who work on historic buildings, and other architects and so forth that might be, part of this, we're definitely open to this. I mean, number one, do you think it's something that could be helpful? And then number two, feel free to shoot holes in it and add other things, or raise questions on this. And it may not happen in this call, since we only have about 15 or so minutes left, but this is, something that we've added to this, and would love to hear your thoughts. Emily's got a question or hand raised.
I've got some thoughts. I think, again, this is another great visual and super easy to follow. I love these matrices that you guys have added. And my question would be, how do we determine the maybe? Like, who determines that? Is that staff, or would that anything maybe category is a major COA?
Yeah, so that would have to go to HPC. So in other words, if you wanted to use, let's just use this example, architectural metal panels on a building, on a building wall as the primary material, you would have to get HPC approval for that. But if it's wood siding and shingles, so basically you're replacing what's there, and you're using wood siding, and it has the same exposure and the same style and so forth as the original, or fits or meets the design standards. If it's new, then it would be permitted by right. That's the best way of explaining it. And we have a little intro section. Sorry, Emily. We have a little intro section that kind of explains that permitted, maybe, and prohibited.
Yeah, and that's on page 94. Another question, how do you find out what is permitted by right?
Oh well, okay, so Phil, you may have to help me here, because
let
this is
me
where
just take a stab. I mean, I think if it's in the permitted column, then it's permitted by right. And what it really gets down to, just like the prohibited is just excluded altogether, the maybe thing, I think what it really takes is going back to the standards about that particular material and seeing if you can determine, based on what's being proposed, where it falls, because it may be a factor of visibility, like how visible it is. It may be a factor of, is this a material for an existing historic building, or is it for new infill, or an addition to a building? So, we're trying to make it at least easy and clear cut for the things that we were saying, sure, that's allowed, or no, that's definitely not allowed. And so I know it may be a little bit troubling to see the word maybe, but that just means you got to go back and look at the standards more. Is that kind of what you're thinking, Keith?
Yeah, it is, but this is, one of the things, and this is, sharing some of our own internal discussions, this matrix, the idea of this matrix can get very complex and complicated very quickly, because we talked about, like Phil just mentioned, maybe a certain material is a maybe based on its visibility or something like that. And so we're still open to, making this a little bit more detailed if we need to, but we also don't want it to get become confusing. So that's one of the things we just it's a balancing act there. But I want to make sure that we're clear on certain things. So, I mean, you know, and Phil, you correct me if I'm wrong, but you know, if there is a let's say you're putting an addition on your house, just because you say I'm going to use brick on the addition doesn't necessarily mean that it's, you know, doesn't have to go through a review process, right? I mean, because this is not about, this is different than the major, minor, and maintenance matrix. This is just about building materials that
And by the way, Keith,
permitted.
Keith, let me just illustrate that exact point about, okay, you're going to do the addition and it's brick. Well, there may be a situation where you can't use brick on an addition. Here's a great example. Let's say it's a clapboard clad original house, historic house. We do have a provision that says you can't use a heavier material for an addition. So in other words, if you've got an original building that's clapboard, you can put a clapboard addition onto it, but you can't put a brick. If you got an original building that's brick, you can put a brick addition on it or a clapboard addition. I mean, that's kind of historically the way, you know, buildings evolved. And so that's an example where brick may normally be a permitted use, but in a given scenario, it may not be permitted, like for an addition.
Does that help, Emily, or is that just confusing?
No, that helps. And I think overall, I see some nice expansions on materials that can be considered here. So I think that this is good.
Okay.
I'm going to keep going unless there's particular things that, and maybe, you know, maybe this is one area that Tom or anyone in the, with building expertise can help to focus in on additional comments and feedback on going forward. So you got the gist of this, right, guys? Okay. So, and then we go to, you know, building additions. And what to consider new buildings. Again, we're about 10 minutes up left, so I want to keep going here.
We probably worn everyone out too.
We get to do this again, so.
I know.
Tonight.
Yeah, like right after, in 10 minutes, we start over.
That's right.
Yeah. But we have to go faster there because it's only 90 minutes.
You just hit record and play it.
That's right. That's right.
So, you know, this is all of the different types, and then there's a whole section which, you know, is on building relocation and demolition by neglect. And I don't see anybody's hands raised, so the disaster preparedness section. Signage. Now signage, you know, staff is we're going to have to spend some time on signage because we have our own section of the UDO that's pretty thorough on signage, but this will go above and beyond the signage intent. So I guess general consensus to folks feel being in the district, it's important to have separate sign standards. I'm seeing some people nod. Yep. Okay. And they're broken by use type. So, and then the type of sign. Murals, we also have standards for murals within the UDO as well. But this would be added to that. And then the glossary of terms. And then at the end is the tree, recommended tree list for appropriate trees within the district. So, you know, I think one of the things that, you know, we're just looking to get some feedback as the advisory committee is, you know, do you guys feel that there's additional things that you want to provide, comments, text suggestions on, are you, you know, liking what you see? Do you think that there's areas that need to be improved upon further?
Jamie, we can send you some more specific comments too. And I know Tom mentioned he was going to do that as well. So when would we need to deliver our feedback on this first draft?
Well, ideally, the HPC, we're going to be having a meeting right after this with the HPC, and then there's another more public meeting that we've advertised for next week with the HPC. So it would be helpful to get your comments, you know, as quickly as possible so that staff can have the opportunity with the consultant to vet them and see what, you know, what changes we would like to include and what additional conversations can be had relative to you know, your input. So knowing those contexts is helpful to kind of frame you know, the discussions with going forward. Ideally, we'd like to have them by the end of the week so that we
Okay.
can, you know whether they're included as you know, attachments to the HPC. So the HPC all gets to see them as well. I think that would be probably the way that I would approach it too. So everybody's aware of, you know, comments. Because we're not going to be taking, I don't think, you know, that we're going to be preparing a summary of all of the minutes or anything pertaining to these. These meetings are being recorded so people can hear the comments and feedback. But if you're looking to have something provided in writing for staff suggestion, that would be helpful to us because, you know, the document's huge. And these are, you know, complicated issues. All right, I'm not seeing anyone else with their hand raised.
Thank you all.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, guys. And for those who I won't see later, have a good night.
I'm going to step away from the camera for a few minutes. I'll be right back.
I think what I'll do is I'll stop this recording
Well,
and
that's
then we'll
right.
start the
It's
next
a different
one.
Zoom connection. or
Yeah,
whatever. Yeah.
I'll do that. So thanks
See ya.
everybody for your input
Thank
and
you.
on this. Have a good evening.
Take care.
Hi.